Hi there, my name is Harold, and I'm from the National University of Singapore. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about our work on trust in human-robot collaboration. I've been interested in trust for some time now, and I think that trust is an interesting and important emergent property of interactions between intelligent agents. So let's start off maybe with a fairly innocuous question. What is trust? I think most of us understand it at a common sense level, but the word gets used a lot in a lot of different settings. And sometimes, when that happens, when a word is used a lot, the semantics gets overloaded. So we talk about trust in government, and in media. And as I as I'm recording this, it's election day in Singapore. People going to the polls and casting their ballots in order to choose which candidate they want to place their trust in to lead the country over the next 4 years. We also talk about trust in corporations. So in Facebook, Google, Amazon, who do you trust with your data, or do you trust no one with your data? Some people place their trust in God or deity or deities. For some people, the only God or deity is money, right? And of course, there is trust in between people, right? So I don't know if you've ever engaged in this activity. The guy who's falling there, he's not falling accidentally, he's falling on purpose. So he's just like, falling backwards on purpose and kind of placing his trust in his friends or colleagues to catch him, right? And if his trust is misplaced, then he's in for a rather bad time, right? And depending on the friends that you have, you may or may not wish to kind of participate in such activities. So our our rather innocuous question in the beginning is not so simple. Trust actually has been studied in many different contexts, in many different fields, in the social sciences, in psychology, in economics, in neuroscience, in philosophy, and trust definitions can vary widely. Trust has been thought of as belief, as a process, as an attitude, depending on field and the lens by which you choose to view it. So we're going to talk a little bit and focus in on trust in robots. Okay, not look at this like large area of trust, but really focus in on human trust in robots. And I think it makes sense to talk about trust in robots because robots are moving out of the factories into our hospitals, into our homes, our offices, shopping centers, onto our roads. They're becoming part of society. And it makes sense to think about trust in robots as we begin to delegate tasks and decision-making autonomy to these entities. So even in the space of human-robot trust, it's fairly large. So this is a citation network of about 1,000 papers that one of my students Bing Chai generated. It's a small part of the literature. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. It's an exciting area, and it's a little bit easy to get lost if you're new to it. So my goal in the next 25 minutes or so is to take this rather amorphous concept called trust and connect it to the more solid ideas in robotics that you're probably aware of, such as reward functions and transition probabilities. In doing so, I hope that we'll be able to get a firm handle on what is generally accepted to be a crucial aspect of collaboration. So trust affects human behavior. And if we can capture or model trust appropriately, then maybe we can better predict how people will act or behave during interactions with robots. A key part of my research in my group is to make meaningful progress towards creating robots that are considered trustworthy. They can act appropriately and sustain long-term collaboration with people. And I think that trust is an integral part of that. So at this point, I would like to distinguish this related concept of robot trustworthiness from human trust in robots. So it's fairly common that when I speak to roboticists or people in computer science or engineering, that they have a particular idea of trust in mind, and it's usually about robot trustworthiness. So they think of trust as some property of the robot, providing some sort of guarantee or certifiable method relating to performance or robustness of the system. And depending on field, they may think about things like transparency, privacy. So I'm going to take all these ideas relating to the desirable properties of robots and put them under the umbrella of robot trustworthiness. Okay, that is distinct from human trust in a robot, which is a property of the human user or stakeholders. Okay, now as trust is pretty, kind of this vague concept, let's make it more concrete. So I'm going to take a pragmatic, kind of utilitarian stance and adopt a view of trust or human trust that we can make concrete via a model. Okay, and I'm going to try to bring together some of the common properties of trust that is often discussed in the literature. So trust emerges in situations where there is uncertainty and vulnerability. So if a human being, the user, controls everything, right, there is really no trust to speak of, because they're not really putting their hands in the, they're not putting themselves in the hands of another, okay? The second thing is that it's multifaceted and latent. So latent meaning that it's hidden, right? It's inside the mind of the user, and it's not something that you can directly observe. Next is multifaceted. So what does it mean by multifaceted? So you can think of it this way. If you were to represent trust in a computer, it's unlikely to be some scalar value, and you will see that in a few slides. Also, previous research in the cloud has shown that trust to be context specific, right? It depends, for example, on the task. So you may trust a robot to vacuum your floor, but not pick up your laundry, let's say. Finally, you can think of trust as kind of like a bottleneck. It relates or mediates the history of observations or interactions with the robot into a decision to trust, okay? Where you decide to rely on the robot to act in a manner that doesn't harm you, okay? So these are the elements that we consider that when we're talking about trust, human trust in the different agents. Now, you can take all these and you can model it. Here, I've modeled it as a probabilistic graphical model, okay, a PGM, where prior to interaction, things like the context, what the environment is like, and so on and so forth, and the personal traits of the user come to affect their trust, right? Before they even begin to interact with the robot. But during interaction, they're going to learn things about the robot by viewing what it does and how it performs, and update their trust in their mind, right? So for example, in this scenario where there is, based on the trust, the human being is going to take some action, right? And based on that, the robot will then take some action based on the situation at hand. And based on the robot's action and performance, the human being is going to update their trust. And here I've unrolled it for 3 time slices, but you can imagine this going on forever. Now, this is just one model of trust, of course, and there can be others, and it's also incomplete, right? If you view this as a PGM, then all we've done by specifying the structure is kind of specifying the conditional independences here, but not kind of the problem. We haven't specified the probability distributions associated with this model, and that's a key part of the research, right? Kind of fleshing out different aspects of this model. You can also view this as like a causal graph, and then you would have to specify kind of the causal mechanisms associated with each one of these arrows, right? Now, you can take a model like this, and then you can begin to address problems in HRI, in human-robot interaction. I'm going to talk about one particular problem today, and I think it's one of the biggest problems that we have, in that there is a general mismatch, okay, between robot trustworthiness and human trust. And I'm sure you've experienced this yourself as roboticists. So, I mean, we do user studies in our lab and demos, right? I'm sure you've done your fair share of demos. And people come into the lab and they see the robot. And I find that some people have really unrealistic expectations of robots. And they make some, I would say, to me at least, unreasonable expectations, but perhaps not unreasonable from the perspective of a layperson. So for example, they come into the lab and I show them a robot with an arm and a gripper, something like a Canova arm or frankly, I make a Panda arm. And they automatically assume that the robot can pick up stuff, right? It's the same when you get the robot to say something. They automatically assume that the robot can understand language, right? But we know as roboticists that these are not really that connected, right? For a robot to pick up something, you need to have a lot of things into place. You need to have perception, you need to have control, you need to have planning. And for a robot to kind of say something, text-to-speech generation is kind of easy, but understanding language, that's a really, really hard problem. So, I blame TV for this mess, because they show people all these robots, they can do all this fancy stuff, backflips and whatnot, and it's just not technologically feasible at this point in time. Also, people interact with other people and other biological organisms, and it's very natural to make this kind of inferences. But we know that robots don't necessarily behave, or rather are not like that, right? Now, there are several real-world implications for this mismatch problem, right? And let me give you 4 examples of that. On the 2 on the left are historical incidents of what we call undertrust in automation. Okay. The first is what is now known as the 100-point disaster. It happened in 1923, where 7 ships, 7 Navy ships, U.S. Navy ships ran aground, and actually 23 sailors lost their lives. because of an undertrust in automated navigation systems, which are new at the time. In 1994, the crash of US Air 1016, it was attributed to a lack of trust in the windshield alert system, which was basically the air traffic controller didn't trust the system enough and only kind of issued one of three alerts, which was now picked up by the plane, and the crew, which wasn't prepared for the wind shear, well, you can see what happened, and that was a tragic outcome due to this undertrust. So trustworthy robots or automation may not be trusted even though they work well. Now today we see kind of the converse problem. We see overtrust in self-driving cars leading to people not paying attention when they should, and that resulting in accidents. A study by Paul Robinette and Ayanna Howard and Alan Wagner, George Tech, showing that people would blindly follow a robot's directions in a simulated emergency, even though they had previously seen the robot failing to work and being told that the robot was broken. So here you see you have untrustworthy robots, at least in untrustworthy in certain scenarios, being trusted to work in ways that they never were intended to work. All right. So these are tragic outcomes, I believe, because of this mismatch. Okay. Now the natural thing to do, of course, is to, if we have a suitable amount of trust, is try to calibrate, right, in order to resolve this mismatch. And that is one of the kind of key topics that we've been exploring in the lab. So we've been exploring different models of trust and using trust in decision making in order to try to resolve this broken link. All right. So some of the early work we did was looking at trust across different tasks. So what kind of, like I said, people make inferences about when they see the robot do something, they make inferences about other things that the robot can do, and we wanted to model this appropriately, and you can model that using something like Gaussian process or a kind of augmented Gaussian process with deep learning, or you can. Then we looked at trust in decision making. This was work done with Stefanos, who's one of the organizers of this cool little workshop. And we looked at trust in intention and capability and calibration of that more recently, as well as trust when you're dealing with multiple agents. Okay, and I'm gonna talk about these more recent works in today's talk. Okay, let's start off by looking at the trust game. All right, this is a very popular game. You might have played it before. You might have heard of it. It's well known in economics, in game theory, and in psychology. So what is this game? There are two players. There's Alice and Bob. Okay, and Alice starts out with some money. Let's say $10. Okay, and she can choose to give some of this money. Let's say $8 to Bob. All right. When the money gets to Bob, the money gets multiplied by some amount. Let's say by a factor of B. Okay, so now let's say B is 3. So now Bob has 3A. All right. Bob can then decide to return a proportion of this money and keeping the rest, okay? Return some of the money to Alice and then keep the rest of it. So now, Bob can be a nice guy and give, kind of split it maybe evenly and give Alice half and he keeps half, or he can be a total jerk and keep all the money, right? So, if you view this and make the assumption that, agents are kind of selfish, they are self-interested, they're completely rational, then there is the Nash equilibrium from lens of game theory is for Alice not to send any money, right? And subsequently Bob would not be able to return anything because Alice would then reason that Bob is, self-interested and he's going to keep everything. So, there's no point for sending in money. She might as well just keep the $10 anyway. But if you actually run this experiment in the lab, and there are jets flying nearby right now, give me a second, and my daughter is starting to cry. I don't know if you can hear that. Working at home. Okay, anyway, back to the trust game. Where was I? Oh yeah, okay. So if you view from the Nash equilibrium for this is for Alice and Bob not to send any money. But if you run this game in the lab, then you will, then people have done this a lot. You find that people actually do send money. So Alice's in the game do send some money. They trust Bob, and Bob actually reciprocates that trust by sending money back to Alice, usually more than the amount that Alice initially sent over. So this shows you that some of the assumptions in classical economics actually don't hold in the real world. So one way to kind of study human-robot trust using this game is to replace Bob with Robob, right? And then you have this game going, and people do this by replacing Bob with an artificial agent. But this game wasn't quite enough for us because we were interested in understanding like different facets of trust. The trust game is built to, or designed to study trust, intentional trust, or decision making, right? Trust-based decision making. We were interested in also the capabilities of robots, okay? And also in learning behavior over time, over multiple rounds of this game. So one of my students, Yachi, took on this problem and redesigned the game a little bit to retain most of the critical elements, yet expanding it in ways that are interesting for us as roboticists. So let me walk you through this game a little bit. Our robot here is a UAV, a drone, and there are two locations that it could visit, A or B. Okay, in location A, there's only one target. Okay, and it's supposed to find these targets, and for each target it finds, it gets like 5 points. So with one target, it gets 5 points. It can either go to location A or it can go to location B, where there are 3 targets, right? And so you'll get 15 points. And of course, you might be saying at this point, well, the answer is obvious. You should just go to location B. And that's true, except that there's a trade-off. So in location A, the sun there shows that the weather is good. Okay, and so the chance of success is high. In location B, however, the rain cloud suggests that the weather is bad. Okay, and although there are more points, there's a higher chance of failure. So there's now this trade-off between, right, the amount of points you get, and as well as the chance of failure. And if you fail, essentially the robot there's no points to be had. Okay, so now you as the user who is introduced to this scenario has to decide: do you trust the robot to make a decision and choose which one of these locations to visit, or do you do it yourself, right? And you can choose to do it yourself, visit A or B, but you incur a certain cost associated with that. All right. Now, there are 4, and we wanted to know like what people would do when faced with this scenario, and they would play this game multiple times, okay, with the robot, and each time kind of learning about the robot's capabilities as well as kind of risk behavior. So we had 4 different kinds of robots where we varied the capability and its risk-seeking behavior. So high capability robots, well, they could succeed pretty well under the different weather conditions compared to low capability robots, which definitely failed when the weather was bad. Okay, high risk-seeking agents or robots would kind of like want to get the most points possible, right? And versus low-seeking robots, we tended to be more conservative. So what did we find? We ran this experiment on Amazon Mechanical Turk with 400 people. And what we find is that both people use both capability as well as kind of the inferred capability and inferred intention when they're deciding to trust the agent, okay, deciding to delegate this task to the robot. Now, this kind of supports this view of trust as this multifaceted concept, right? That people take these different notions of capability, estimations of trust, of intention into consideration when deciding to trust. It was also important to note that it was just not necessarily the risk-seeking behavior that was important, but the alignment of that risk-seeking behavior with their own preference. So people who were reported that they were, more risk-taking in general, generally preferred the robot that took the riskier choice. Okay. Now, Yachi took this a little bit further, one step further, and got them to play a different game. All right. After doing the searching task, they would play either a mapping task or a firefighting task, where we would, fix one of the aspects. So fix one of the facets like intention and vary capability, or fix the capability and vary the intention. And we find that people actually transfer, right? They make use of what they've learned in order to make trust-based decisions in these novel situations, right? So people do transfer what they know into novel situations where trust is arguably more important. So now we think that what's going on is that people, when they're choosing to trust or delegate to the robot, they're asking kind of 2 questions, all right? First, they ask, what can the robot do? And you can think of that on the robot side, right, as the capabilities of the robot, the action space that the robot has access to, and the transitions associated with that, right? So how good the robot is at taking a particular action and landing in a higher value state, right? And the second is, what is it trying to achieve? All right, and that relates to the intention of the robot, which you can think of as the reward function that the robot is trying to optimize, or the policy or the resultant policy of the robot. Now, what we want to do when it comes to calibration is maybe we can link these two together somehow. And that's a topic that these three guys, three of my students, were exploring, Joshua, Jeffrey, and Bing Chai. And this was Joshua's undergraduate thesis project, okay? Recently accepted in IROS. And so Joshua started thinking about this, and he wanted a scenario. And so this is we settled on a badly disguised version of Dylan and Anka's recipe scenario in their Searle paper. So in this, instead of a recipe, we have a shopping list, okay? And the robot is trying to help the human being in order to complete the shopping list, okay? But the robot doesn't know what the shopping is. He kind of have to infer it from the human being's actions, okay? Not only that, so one key distinguishing feature of this scenario from the one in the Searle paper is that there is asymmetric capabilities here. So the robot is good at certain things, at picking up certain objects, and the human being is better at some other object, but they don't know. The robot has no idea what the human is good at, and the human has no idea what the robot is good at. Okay, and so they have to learn this through multiple rounds of interaction, and hopefully, if they can learn what each other is good at, they'll be better at the robot will become better at inferring what the human being wants, and also they'll be able to complete the shopping task more effectively. So how can we be, this situation is pretty complicated, it's fairly complex. How can we begin to address it? So Joshua had two key ideas, I think, to make this work, right? The first is that, if the outcomes of the actions are always hidden away, it becomes very hard to kind of learn what the robot can and cannot do. So the first thing we can try is to make the action outcomes denoted by this A tilde here to be explicit. Okay, so now through standard probabilistic kind of manipulations, we can think of it as the typical transition probabilities where these action outcomes are implicit to be a marginalization, right, over these action outcomes. Now we've from the first line to the second one, what we are doing is simply making this assumption that the action outcome doesn't depend on the state. And this is not strictly necessary, but it really simplifies the model quite a bit. Now, once you do this, you have a nice little structure here where you have split the transition probabilities into two parts, right? The first part deals with the physics of the world. And we're going to assume in this work that the world physics is known to both agents. Okay, what is not known are the agent capabilities. So when an agent takes in a particular action, what's the likelihood that it's going to be successful or failing? So this is what this AS here and AF here is. This is success and this is failure. And we've shown two levels here, so success or failure, but it doesn't need to be binary. The formulation kind of generalizes to situations with multiple levels of success, Now, with these action outcomes, you can actually augment the action space to have intended failures. Okay, now it's a bit strange to think about intended failures. I think it more as communicative kind of actions. All right, so the human being or other robot can choose action to kind of indicate that they want to do A, but intentionally fail, so they can't do it, right? And there are different ways you can kind of design these communicative actions. But the key idea is that you want to convey, right, the message to the other agent that you want to do action A, but you can't do it. All right, so that's kind of the idea behind the communicative actions. Now, how can you then use this decomposition kind of easily? You're going to embed this uncertainty over the capabilities and learning into the transition probabilities, and we're going to do that using Dirichlet parameters. Okay, so we're going to augment the state space now to have these additional parameters. You have your typical state features, but you're also going to have the human intention parameters, the human capability parameters, as well as the human's belief over the robot's capabilities. Or we call this the trust intention capability, or TIC POMDP, which you can see as a variant of the Bayes adaptive POMDP. To solve this POMDP, Joshua designed a solver, an online solver, based on Monte Carlo tree search. And this, again, is an extension of or variant of the Bayes adaptive POMCP solver. which we have shown, which Josh showed in simulations to scale well to a large state space where you kind of increase the number of shopping items or the number of shopping lists, and resulting in better task rewards compared to a standard POM-CP model, which doesn't take these capabilities and calibration into account. Interesting, we also ran a lab experiment, right? So we got 28 people to come into the lab and play this game with the robot, okay? And what we find is that when after they play the robot, they also answer kind of test survey questions about the robot, and we find that the total reward obtained when they're using the tick solver and TIP-POM-DP is that they achieve higher rewards with this agent. So it shows that calibration leads to better performance over the long term, because people understand more about the robot, presumably because people understand more about the robot, and then they're able to carry over their knowledge into the subsequent rounds. And they do report that in the end they trust the robot more compared to a robot that doesn't take this into consideration. So now we have this nice beginnings actually of this idea of how we can calibrate the trust in the person's mind with the capabilities and the trustworthiness of the robot. But we've kind of talked about a situation where there are two agents, right? What happens if there are more agents than that? What happens if you have a doctor with this, in this situation where you have a medical doctor and a patient, like a medical robot and a patient? What if you have a situation like at home where you have multiple robots, or in the factory where you have multiple workers with multiple robots? How can we begin to kind of address this kind of scenarios? So I'm going to talk a little bit just like how we started off with the trust game. I'm going to talk about this another game called the public goods game, which you can think of as generalization of the trust game or the prison dilemma game to N agents. So here we have 12 agents, right, who are going to contribute some money to a pool. Okay, and in this pool, just like in the trust game, it gets multiplied and it grows, right? And then this amount is then dispensed back to the agents. Now, the key point to note is that during this end phase where they dispense the money back, it's not possible to exclude anybody, okay, from receiving that benefit. So it's like people paying taxes, okay, in order to provide for a park or public transportation. You can't stop someone from entering the park, or you shouldn't, or you shouldn't stop someone from like using public transportation, even though maybe they didn't pay any taxes, right? So this is non-exclusion. So you cannot exclude somebody from reaping the benefits, all right, at the end. So maybe in this kind of scenario, because there's no exclusion, maybe one of the agents starts thinking to himself, let's call him Steve, all right, this red circle is around Steve, and Steve starts thinking, there's no way for them to exclude me from reaping the benefits at the end. Maybe I'll be better off if I don't contribute anything, and I won't affect the pool that much, but and I'll still get some money at the end, so they'll be great, and I would be one up over everyone else. And so we call people like Steve, a defector or free rider, right? So he's the jerk that doesn't want to contribute, doesn't want to pay taxes. And the rest of the people are called cooperators. Now, this game proceeds as usual, as I mentioned before. The money goes in, it gets multiplied, it grows, and then it gets dispensed out. This value C hat, which is less than C because Steve didn't contribute, but he still receives some amount at the end. Now, this you can again view this from the lens of game theory, and you can see that the Nash equilibrium here is for nobody to contribute, right? So everybody will start thinking like Steve, and then nobody contributes at the end, and there is no trust. But again, if you play this in a lab, right, the results vary widely. You get certain amount of people usually that are still contributing to the pool. Now, the trust game is actually just one particular type, a particular game of a class of games called population games. Now, population games are very useful. They've been used to model all kinds of things like, provision of parks or a shared resource like bikes, to model congestion on highways or choices of social networks or even operating system, right? And we'll look at examples of this in a few slides. So what are the properties of population games? Now, I won't give you a precise definition. What I'd rather give you is just the key ideas. In population games, the number of agents is large. So here we're going to study like a large number of agents, all right? And each agent is small and anonymous. By small, I mean that any single agent's behavior has little effect on any other like individual agent. right? So like Steve, not contributing a little bit into the pool doesn't affect the total sum that much. But of course, when everybody stops contributing, then of course the end result is, the end outcome is not good. And furthermore, each agent is anonymous, meaning that if there's two agents, Steve and John, if I exchange their names, exchange the labels, it doesn't change the game. We also wanted to explain, as I said before, we're interested in learning, right? Agents that learn. So we are going to consider independent learners, meaning that they reason and learn solely based on reward signals. Okay, so they like any one of your RL-based methods kind of falls into this category, where they repeatedly apply, when they learn, they repeatedly apply an update to a set of critical parameters. So you can think of this as, kind of like the probability of choosing action A, right, or action B, kind of stuff like that. And a lot of RL methods fall under this category. You can formulate Q-learning, gradient descent or ascent, or hey, my kid is yelling again. So Q-learning, gradient ascent or descent, or cross-learning as in this kind of manner, right, where the agents are kind of updating this set of critical parameters. So if we want to study the learning dynamics in this sort of situation, well, in two-player games, this is fairly straightforward. You kind of formulate both these agents as ODEs and you couple them and you can solve it, right? But the moment you start thinking about n agents where n is large, then this becomes intractable. You can't really, the number of ODEs that you need to solve and which are all coupled together, it just becomes a huge mess, and there's no way to, to do this reasonably. So something that a very nice kind of solution to this problem that was that my postdoc Shuya came up with is a probabilistic approach to this problem. So again, we have the set of n agents, right? And there is this vector of d independent critical parameters for each of the agents, all right? Now, the way she views this is to think of this as drawing, if you randomly draw an agent from this population, you analyze this agent, all right? So when you do this, you have this random variable x, big capital X, and this random variable follows a distribution P, which is, you can think of it intuitively as the proportion of agents having a critical parameter X in the population, okay? And you can take this kind of idea, this probabilistic kind of approach, and kind of work out a way to describe the learning dynamics, not with this huge number of coupled ODEs, but with a single partial differential equation. So this is really nice because as long as certain conditions are met, you can, this is extremely efficient. You don't need to solve this big mess of equations. You just need to kind of substitute the various elements into this partial differential equation and then work through the machinery of solving this. So what are the conditions? The first is that you need a set of n agents, right? And n is presumably large here, heading to infinity. And they're all using the same independent learning method, right? So they're all using like Q-learning, they're all using cross-learning or gradient descent, you choose, but they're all using the same method. Two, they're all learning, you can think of them as the agents as updating their critical parameters using this function f theta here, right? So this function f theta, and f has to be differentiable, continuously differentiable, and it depends on its the current parameters, the reward that it receives, okay, and what we call as an information set. Now, this information is typically empty, but it could contain things like the best reward in hindsight or the potential rewards from taking other actions, things that don't reveal the kind of the existence or information about like kind of the other agents, okay. And as long as you have this update function, then and it's continuously differentiable, and then it's great. And also notice that it's Markovian, okay, in nature. These critical parameters are updated. The dynamics of which are Markovian because there is no t times t plus one, or rather the next state depends only on the previous one. Now there is also the reward function here, which is given by this function g. And basically what this says is that agents with the same critical parameters receive the same reward, okay? Now, if these conditions are met, then your learning dynamics, as I said before, is described very elegantly by this PDE. Now, this PDE is also general, right? It applies to various different kinds of independent learning algorithms on the different kinds of population games. So I spoke about the public goods game as an example, but you could apply this PDE or specialize this PDE for different kinds of games, and I'll show you that in a sec for different games, and I'll show you that in a second. And there are applications by examining the resultant form. So you could, study the form in order to kind of qualitatively determine the different evolutionary dynamics, or to understand the trends of behaviors, or to do this in a steady state analysis. And this is just resulting from this really neat kind of formulation that Shuya came up with. So I'm going to show you some experiment results for the kind of, I'm running out of time. So for the kind of like the kind of way or machinery or how you can use the PDE, I'll refer you to the paper. Here, I just want to show you that it works. Okay, so we're going to compare the theoretical results from applying our PDE or formulation to the gold standard, which is agent-based simulation. So you run like large-scale simulations with thousands of agents, and you see whether the theoretical result matches the empirical ones. And here we see that yes, it does to very well matches the agent-based simulation. So ABS is the agent-based simulations, and here the theoretical results really nicely match the simulations. So when you look at the public goods games, you can examine different kind of learning algorithms. Here's cross-learning, Q-learning, and gradient descent. And depending on the type of agent there is, then you see different kind of dynamics. So cross-learning, Q-learning, the progress towards like full defection is a bit slower, but for gradient descent, you see a much faster kind of increase towards everybody just defecting at the end, right? You can look at other games. So this is the Mac versus Windows game, which people use to model the network effect. So the more people use a particular operating system, the more applications develop for it, so people benefit. So we started off with these simulations with a proportion of Mac users being slightly less than the critical mass needed to achieve like 100% prevalence. So for cross-learning and gradient descent, the number of Mac users basically goes down to 0. Number of users goes up to 1, right? But this doesn't occur for Q-learning, okay? Which suggests that maybe it's a little less sensitive to the initial distribution, okay? And this is nicely, you don't have to run like thousands of information to get this result. This is kind of nicely emerges. You can just run LPE, which is very, very efficient to do. So finally, let's look at one other game, which is called the L-Farrell bar game. It's used to model congestion effect, right? So if more than 60% of people choose to go to the bar, then it's overcrowded and people don't have fun. And it's also a bad idea in this time of COVID, so please don't go to the bar. So anyway, if less than 60% of people go to the bar, then people have fun, okay, in this game, okay, compared to staying at home because it's not, it's just this amount of space and, you won't catch COVID. So yeah, here we see that the expected outcome, with the expected probability of going to the bar is about the threshold, which is what we expect, right? Again, you get to see the learning dynamics of this game, right, as time progresses, and this results from just applying the PD. You can make the L-Farrell bar game a little bit more complicated by changing the threshold of the 60% threshold at different times. So here you can see we've changed it at t equals 40 and t equals 80. So we've reduced the threshold from 60% to like 20%, maybe in time of COVID, at time equals 40, and you'll see what agents do in that space. So you can see the different kind of learning behaviors that result from this change. And again, the theoretical results really closely match the empirical findings obtained by the simulations. So now we have, I've shown you a couple of examples, kind of looking at the large, right, where you have like a very, very large number of agents looking at the close to infinity, just an infinite number of agents. And we have like the smallest team that you can have, which is like 2 people, right? Of course, there's a lot of work in between. It's not like there's nothing there. There's quite a bit of people looking at teams of agents kind of working together with robots and people in order to solve problems. And in this situation, trust is also a very important kind of aspect. In my lab, we're trying to work our way, kind of using these methods, kind of working our way towards the middle, which tends to be fairly complex, kind of, in the 2-agent team, it's kind of okay to handle with our kind of POM-DPs to some extent, or our interactive POM-DPs. In the large kind of regime. You can make some assumptions that, you know, can give you the nice tractable forms that you can use. But, you know, kind of going to the middle, kind of break some of these assumptions. So we are working our way kind of towards the middle, and also expanding on some of the aspects of the different kind of projects I spoke about. So I hope that I was successful in my goal in guiding you towards understanding trust a little bit better, at least trust in robots. And the examples I've shown you illustrates like how we can get a good handle on a fairly complex and vague notion such as trust, and make it amenable to tools in our trade. Now, if you want to find out more about these different kind of works, you know, like for example, multi-trust models, or, you know, our work in situation awareness and trust, then go to my website or feel free to email me. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Okay, I think that if you're working anywhere where it involves people and robots, trust is going to play a role. And I hope that this kind of my little talk has kind of introduced you a little bit to kind of thinking about this area, and kind of got you thinking a little bit about how you can enhance cooperation in these scenarios. So finally, I just want to kind of have a shameless plug for a paper that we have in RSS this year. This is of a fairly different flavor than what I've discussed in today's workshop talk. This is on more towards physical interactions. And I'm interested in how to make physical interactions with people more robust. And I think we can do that via skin. And here, this is a paper by my students and my collaborator, Benjamin T. And we're looking at event-driven visual tactile sensing, collaborating sight and sound, but in an event-driven manner for robot sensing for different applications of slip detection and grasp and like object detection just via grasping. So have a look. We are Tuesday from 3 to 5 p.m. Very nice work. So please come by. Do take care and stay safe. And remember, have the right amount of trust in your robots.